We're starting off this video right.
Hey there, and welcome to the second episode of Death to the Party. I'm Brains, your friendly neighborhood zombie, here to show you the corruption and disappointment that is American politics. Before I go any further, I want to send my condolences not only to the victims of the Texas and Buffalo mass shootings, but to all the victims of gun violence. It is clear that something needs to be done, but what should be done has sparked a large divide and massive debate here in America. I am pro Second Amendment. I believe in a citizen's right to own and bear arms, but even I can see that something needs to be changed. Here in America, it's estimated that there are 393 million guns with only a population of 326 million. So it's safe to say Americans love guns and have plenty of them. I myself own a gun, legally of course. Speaking of illegal versus legal, brings us to our next almost impossible statistic to know. Out of those 393 million guns, how many are illegally owned versus legally owned? Because the very nature of a gun being illegal probably means it wasn't bought in a store, the serial number may be removed, or it doesn't have one, and probably has little information on it at all. In fact, there isn't much recent data on whether or not a gun used in a crime was legally owned or not. The federal government stopped tracking that in 2004. Kind of seems like that'd be very useful information to keep track of. But luckily, there is some data laying around from the safest city on the planet, Chicago, Illinois. Anyways, you get my point. These next few stats come from a gun trace report from 2017 conducted by the city of Chicago. Side note, I will try to start leaving direct links to the sources in the description. These stats come from the years 2013 to 2016. Firstly, there were over 7,000 illegal guns confiscated per year. That's a lot of guns. So much so that Chicago recovered 6 times as many guns as New York and 1.5 as many guns as Los Angeles. I find this next one to be very thought provoking, to say the least. These are the top 10 sources of dealers for recovered firearms. The number one spot supplied is 6.7% of illegal guns confiscated, which is about 469 guns. Chicago also tracks something they called time to crime. Basically, they looked at the date the firearm was purchased versus the date it was confiscated or used in a crime. Using basic logic, one could deduce if the time to crime was short, this firearm was more than likely purchased specifically for criminal use. If the time to crime was very long, you could assume that the gun was probably sold to someone on Craigslist and then again, and somehow ended up in the hands of a criminal. I mean, let's be honest, who's doing all this to sell a weapon? Basically, what I'm trying to get at here is that there's a very clear problem on both sides of the illegal and legal gun ownership. I will concede that the majority lies in illegal firearms, but should we not address the side that we can do something about, the legal side? I'm not saying ban all guns or get rid of certain guns. This is just my personal opinion here. I'm totally fine with waiting a few more days, having a few more hoops to jump through if it meant at the end of the day it potentially stopped another gun from being on the street illegally or used improperly. I live in a very liberal state, probably won't be hard to guess which one, and let me tell you something. It is not that hard to get a firearm. I would not mind it being a bit more rigorous. I believe in the right to bear arms, but I also believe there are crazy people out there who will abuse the legal system to buy weapons. Why not make sure we do our due diligence and say not sell an 18-year-old two AR-15s 2 days apart with a bunch of ammo on top of that? There has to be some middle ground where we keep our firearms, but stuff like that isn't allowed to happen. I'm also not dense enough to think that laws alone will do anything. Mexico has very strict gun laws, but do we really think they are being followed, let alone even glanced at? Versus a place like Switzerland, where 1/4 of the population, 2 million out of 8 million, own firearms and they haven't had a mass shooting in 21 years. Is there a gun problem in America? Big time. But I also believe there is more to it than just guns. This next stat comes from pewresearch.org. In fact, in 2020, handguns were involved in 59% of the 13,621 U.S. gun murders and non negligent manslaughters for which data is available, according to the FBI. Rifles, the category that includes sometimes referred to as assault weapons, were involved in 3% of firearms murders, shotguns were involved in 1%, and the remainder of gun homicides and non negligent manslaughters, 36%, involved other kinds of firearms or those classified as type not stated. Now keep this stat in your head, it's going to come up in a bit. I recently got Twitter mainly because I started this channel and need some sort of social media presence. By the way, if you have Twitter, I would love your follow. This is my handle. Anyways, man, Twitter's a crazy place. I mean, if I'm not careful, I'll get lost in there for a while. Here's some things I have come across. Exhibit A. What does an AR-15 style rifle mean? This guy responds with, you know damn well what it means. It means when its projectile hits a 10-year-old child, it will sever a limb or explode a head, abdomen, or other utter carnage that makes identifying the child in any way other than DNA testing impossible. That is 100% false. It is designed for mass destruction and war. And then I reply just saying that's not what the caliber is capable of. And when I say caliber, it's just the size of the bullet essentially. Yes, I know technically it's the size of the cartridge, but you get where I'm going. Look, I get it. This person is probably very emotional. What happened must have been hell on earth for those involved. But this person's knowledge, or what they believe to be knowledge of firearms, is alarming. I have to ask the question, how can you have a conversation about gun control with someone who thinks like this? On the flip side, if you mention any form of gun control to somebody on the right, they think you instantly mean taking their guns away. It's like we are losing the ability to see the gray, the in between, the compromise. It's all white or black, yes or no, all of it or none of it. How are we supposed to get anything done with this mentality that we're just sinking deeper and deeper into? Our next example is Exhibit B. This is a picture with cities that have had mass shootings and the weapon of choice used to commit those heinous acts. But remember that stat from earlier? Assault weapons are only involved in 3% of firearm murders? And here lies my problem with the ban assault rifle movement. If you ban assault rifles, you would only be reducing deaths by 3%. Honestly, what is the logic? Is it a philosophical question? Is 10 deaths in one day worse than one death every day for 10 days? Is it worse than 2 deaths every day for 5 days? I get it, something needs to change with assault rifles and purchasing them. But the real issue isn't being addressed, the amount of deaths happening every day in major cities. 760 people were killed in Chicago in 2021. It's not even halfway through 2022, and already 214 people have been killed. From 2009 to 2021, 1,363 people have been shot and killed in mass shootings. That is just 2 years added together from Chicago. In 2018, there were 470. In 2019, there were 453. In 2020, there were 706. The grand total from 2018 to 2022 currently is 2,603 murders with firearms. That is just one of many cities, and unfortunately, the deaths from mass shootings like the one we have seen recently pale in comparison to what is going on in some of our cities. In 2021, 760 people died. Divide that by 365, you get 2.1. 2 people died every day in Chicago for a year straight, and we aren't up in arms about our fellow Americans being murdered in the streets? Let's fix that. I want to fix that right now. But the push for the assault weapons ban isn't going to fix that. But you know what will? Enforcement. Some of these cities, Chicago included, have very strict gun laws. Why are they not being enforced? Sadly, though, the left isn't really big on the enforcement side. From defund the police to letting people get away with stealing $900 or less worth of stuff. Unfortunately, those laws you want passed and followed must be enforced by something called law enforcement. Again, you can see why the left is just very confusing to me. Where's the outcry for the countless dying in our cities from gun violence? What are our politicians proposing for that? Next up is our Republican friends and the hundreds of millions spent by gun lobbyists. I want to make myself very clear here. Lobbying is wrong and should not be a thing. I cannot believe we, the American people, allow this sort of shady, horrible behavior to take place. To me, it's baffling. I know both sides are guilty of lobbying, but today we're talking about gun control. So, of course, we have to talk about gun lobbyists. In fact, Ted Cruz has received the most gun lobbying money, $442,000. So, yeah, you got to go. I don't care who, when, or what. You receive money from lobbyists, bye, along with every other politician that has done so. We, the American people, pay your salary. You don't need fancy trips, sports arena tickets, private jet rides, or any other lavish things. We elected you to raise our voices, not the voices of companies who only care about profits. This next bit comes from the same Pew Research study. 81% of Americans told Pew Research Center in 2021 that they support expanding background checks to include private firearm sales and purchase at gun shows, including a majority of Republican respondents. It's obvious a lot of us want something to be changed. For those of you on the right who are so against us changing anything, I just say this: gun control does not equal gun confiscation. I do not believe in the confiscation of legally possessed firearms, but please, it is clear something needs to be done in this country in the regards to access of guns. So don't die red faced screaming on a hill just because it's something the opposition is pushing. But with Democrats ignoring the real carnage in our cities and Republicans getting paid by gun lobbyists, will anything ever change? Until we come together as a community, as a city, as a state, and as a country and say, hey, things need to change and they need to change now. How can we hold our elected officials accountable when we are so busy being at each other's throats? When will we say enough is enough? I get it. We have difference of opinions on gun control, but let's find a middle ground. Let's work on possible feasible solutions and not attack each other or become confrontational just because someone raises a different idea or belief. But with all that being said, thank you for watching the second episode of Death to the Party. If you liked it, hit the like button and please consider subscribing. Also, let me know your stance on gun control. Let's have that conversation. I would love to hear from you. And remember, death to the party.